In December 1900, 3 lighthouse keepers disappeared from their post without a trace in mysterious circumstances. Explanations of the vanishing have ranged from local legends of giant birds sweeping away island inhabitants to resident vengeful spirits. Donald MacArthur, James Ducat and Thomas Marshall were stationed on the island of Eileen Moor in the remote Flannan Isles. The small archipelago is situated at the outer rim of a chain of islands called the Hebrides off the northwest coast of Scotland. The Eileen Moor lighthouse was brand new and state-of-the-art at the time, having been completed in 1899. It was well equipped with concrete tramways leading from cliffside landings on the east and west aspects of the island, enabling ships to drop off staff and supplies, regardless of which direction the wind was blowing. Each treacherous cutaway landing had a crane platform about 20 metres above the raging seas. The lighthouse itself on the peak of the island casts its beam from high above sea level and in those days provided congenial living quarters for its crew of 3 keepers. According to the Northern Lighthouse Board, the mysterious disappearances were first registered after the master, Captain James Harvey, who dispatched a telegram on December 26, 1900 regarding the missing men. On that day, the ship Hesperus had arrived at the island to serve as a routine stop, delivering essential provisions to the 3 keepers and leaving behind a relief lightkeeper, Joseph Moore. The lighthouse keepers were rostered into 2-week shifts, requiring that once a fortnight the Hesperus would convey a replacement keeper to the island in order to relieve one of the men on duty. On that particular day, the routine journey to the island had been delayed due to rough weather conditions. It appeared that the West Landing had been exposed to heavy storms during the time between the previous relief on December the 7th and the arrival of the Hesperus on December the 26th. The first sighting of the island was ominously concerning in that the captain and crew observed the lighthouse itself to be dark. Later inquiries revealed that the Northern Lighthouse Board had been receiving reports of this from passing ships for over 10 days, but those reports had become lost in the bureaucracy. There were no flags flying over the lighthouse, as was the custom, and they were waiting crates on the landing. Things only became stranger when none of the keepers descended to provide the crew with mooring lines, and neither was there any response to his signal flare fired from the ship. Moore eventually climbed the treacherous stairway up to the darkened lighthouse to investigate. Captain Harvey was struck by the island's forlorn stillness. He requested Moore to search the outpost's surrounds for any sign of life, and when Moore returned to the ship reporting the 3 men's absence, Captain Harvey notified the mainland with his chilling telegram. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but as no response was made, managed to land Moore, who went up to the station but found no keepers there. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that an accident must have happened about a week ago. For years it was rumoured that when Moore investigated the lighthouse interior, he was met by an odd sight. It was obvious that whatever fate had beleaguered the keepers had struck suddenly. The front door had been left ajar, revealing a half-eaten meal of mutton, potatoes and pickles sitting on the table with one chair toppled on its side. Most bizarrely of all, every single clock had stopped working, with no obvious explanation as to why. Moore also observed that the men seemed to have been inadequately clothed for the turbulent weather. Mr. Marshall and Mr. Ducat were apparently both wearing sea boots, with Mr. Marshall in his oilskins, but Mr. Ducat in only an old waterproof coat. Donald MacArthur had left his coat behind, and from the evidence appeared to be in only his shirt sleeves. It appeared that all 3 lighthouse keepers had urgently left their posts at the same time, an action that contravenes protocol regulations. Captain Harvey then wrote a letter detailing Moore's findings, also stating that there was nothing to give any indication that the missing keepers had lost their lives. The Northern Lighthouse Board then sent a superintendent called Robert Muirhead to officially investigate more extensively, completing his official report on January 8, 1901. As no remains of the men were ever found, Muirhead's final determination was that the sea had washed away the men. During his investigation, Muirhead had become aware that the three lighthouse keepers were resilient and reliable men, quiet, practical, and not likely to be swayed by superstition. This made the supposed last few entries in the lighthouse log of Thomas Marshall, the keeper who was second in command, all the more unsettling. According to long-standing legend, on December the 12th, Marshall had written of a gale which had, in his words, lashed the sea to fury. He wrote that the keepers had never seen such a storm, that they were storm-bound and could not go outside. Strange additions to the journal entry were observations of his co-workers' emotions. Ducat was described as irritable and then quiet, while MacArthur, a man reputed to be tough and experienced seafarer, was said to be crying. The storm continued into the following day, when by midday a grey daylight had broken. But strangely, all three men were then described as praying. Oddly fearful behaviour from well-seasoned keepers in a brand new, supposedly safe lighthouse. The final brief entry, made at 1 p.m. on December 15th, ends with an eerie tranquility. Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. The most perplexing aspect of all in these reputed log entries is that there were no reported storms in the area on any of these dates. All the surrounding seas should have been calm up until December the 17th. This has led to the unsettling conclusion that whatever took place must have occurred after the storm, and in addition, the psychological state of the men suggested that it may well have been something unearthly. The island of Eilean Moor has long had a reputation for unexplained phenomena. Herders of the island's only permanent residents, its sheep, called it the Other Country, believing it to be a supernatural location. Its tiny stone chapel, built in the 7th century by St. Flannan, is said to move even non-believers to pray while on the island, which abounds with superstition and rituals. It has been alleged that small bones have been unearthed on the island, earning it from as early as 1790 the nickname of the Isle of the Little Men, or Pygmies. Accounts of the strange rituals practiced on the island were recorded in 1695 by the writer Martin, who travelled there. Men from the nearby Isle of Lewis would visit the Flannans in the summer to perform their unusual act of worship. The men would strip to their waist, circle the chapel on their knees, and speak using only odd word substitutions when on the island. This was thought by some to be the language of the ancient Pygmy people. The Flannan Isles lighthouse has become a tourist destination for paranormal investigators due to reports of hauntings and ghostly apparitions there, while other lighthouse keepers over the years have noticed strange occurrences. Following the men's mysterious disappearance in December 1900, subsequent lighthouse keepers have claimed to hear eerie voices carried by the salty air, which reportedly cried out for Marshall, Ducat and MacArthur. Some very practical causes have been suggested for the disappearances of the three men. Initially reported by Harvey as a dreadful accident, his telegram theorised that the men were blown off the cliffs or drowned while trying to secure a crane. Muirhead's investigation came to a similarly straightforward conclusion that all the men had gone down to secure the battered west landing with mooring ropes and been swept away by a massive wave. Another theory was put forward by naturalist John Love, who has meticulously researched the incident. In 2015, the Sunday Post reported his finding that the Eilean Moor lighthouse keepers had received a 5-shilling fine for storing their equipment inadequately during a previous storm. He suggests that as another storm brewed in late December 1900, two of the lighthouse keepers may have set out to secure their gear in order to avoid another fine. As it was not permitted for all three to leave the lighthouse, only 2 of their number would have descended to the landing to secure the equipment. The third, Donald MacArthur, would have remained to man the lighthouse. When the others did not return, he would have become concerned for their safety, or alternatively, may have seen a huge wave approaching. Either way, Caesar's impulsive rushing to check on them. However, to a large extent, despite all the attention the story has attracted from researchers and even filmmakers, the mystery still seems unsolved in the public domain. It is unusual that no remains of the men were ever found, and the apparent final strange log entries were inexplicable given the supposedly calm conditions around the island at the time. The wealth of experience and sheer grit of the men belie the seemingly impulsive actions of venturing out in a storm without protective clothing. A closer look shows that over time, the story of the Flannan Isles disappearances became embellished very rapidly in popular culture and continued to do so over time. Only 11 years after the event, an epic poem published by W. Gibson dramatised the tragedy with the effect of creating new fictions around the events. Moore's original report apparently does not mention a half-eaten meal and a knocked-over chair, and the published logbook entries have also been found to be fabricated. Rather than the subordinate marshal, the principal keeper Ducat would have kept the log, which was to record weather events and would never have included accounts for the men's moods and emotions. Historian Mike Dash found that the real logbooks became misplaced by the courts during the 1901 inquest. The ferocity of surrounding storms and a strong undertow, even outside the lighthouse door, was underestimated by all who stayed on the island. The only phenomena not debunked to date are the eerie voices heard by subsequent keepers around the lighthouse. Voices heard screaming and calling out for the 3 lost men.